So tell us about a little bit about what you're working on now. You got this new Merle Travis book coming.
Just finished.
Tell us how that kind of came to the fore and what was the motivation to say something that's never been said before, all that kind of stuff.
So, I've written a couple other books, the Strat in the Attic 1 and the Strat in the Attic 2, and those were both about finding vintage guitars and everything. And so I was thinking about, well, what should be the next book that I should write? And it was really bothering me that Merle Travis did not have a biography out. It really didn't make any sense because this is a guy that did so much stuff. I mean, not only, was the master of this thumb picking style that bears his name, Travis, but, he wrote these classic American folk songs, 16 Tons and Dark as a Dungeon and Smoke, Smoke, Smoke That Cigarette and all that. And then, he also was a major inventor of guitar things. He's the guy behind the Bigsby vibrato. He's the guy that basically came up with the idea for the solid body electric guitar that Leo Fender saw and turned into the Telecaster. And we can get into some show and tell here in a minute about that if you want.
Yes.
But, beyond that, it's like he did so many amazing things. He made all these records. He was a cartoonist. Just on and on. So it bothered me that he did not have any sort of book out there.
I didn't even know. That's amazing.
It was doubly strange because he was a great writer. I mean, out of all the country music stars in the history of country music, he's probably the best writer there ever was. And he wrote tons and tons of stuff, but he never wrote an autobiography. So I met his two daughters that live out here in Southern California, Merlene and Cindy. And I said, man, I want to write the Merle Travis book. Let's make this happen. And they were into it. And I saw them a couple of times. And then finally they said, well, maybe you should come look and see what we have in the storage unit. And of course I'm like, yes, let's do that. And so basically after he died, they put all this stuff in a storage unit up in Santa Barbara. And it just kind of has sat there the whole time. Like, they haven't really gone through it. Cindy has gone through some of the stuff and organized it just in the last few years, but it kind of just sat out there for 3 decades, kind of untouched. And so we started going through all this stuff, and there was about 100 pages of raw, unedited autobiography that he had never finished. It only went up to about the year 1955. But I said to them, look, we can take this and get a book deal with this, no problem. So I approached BMG Books, which is part of the BMG, record label conglomerate. They've been doing a lot of cool music books. And I said, look, we found this much of an unedited raw autobiography, and I can write the rest. And we have all this other stuff in the storage unit, tons of pictures, memorabilia, etc. And they said yes. And so then I started working on the thing. It took me about 3 years of research and writing. I had to make a field trip out to Kentucky, where he's from, and then visit all these other 90-something-year-old people that are still alive out in Nashville and Ohio and places like that. So it was one of those things that at the end of the day, I probably made about 8 cents an hour. It's like, what's next? Acting? Like first guitar, then writing. But I'm actually very proud of it. It should be out by the end of the year. I think it turned out really well, and I think that I did a good job on his legacy.
Fantastic! I can't wait to read it because I'm a big fan of Merle Travis. It's one of those things where I'll go through different phases, and I won't listen for a while, and then all of a sudden, my son was ripping some of my vinyl onto his computer so he could work his magic with sampling and whatnottery, and he loaded in Walking the Strings, right? And so I'm hearing, I was like, man, I knew that at once upon a time. And so I figured it out again, and I was playing, and I was just like, you think to yourself, where did this guy, I mean, certainly, like, I think of like maybe Blind Blake and some of these old Piedmont style individuals. I mean, it's just fascinating. Where did he draw most of that stuff from?
That's a very good question because, where he's from, Kentucky, and then where he first started his career, Cincinnati, those are two places where there's just a really interesting kind of confluence of North and South and black and white and blues and jazz and country. And it kind of all comes together in that region. And so, there were people that were playing the thumb style of guitar, like ragtime guys, like you were saying, African-American guitarists like Blind Blake and Blind Lemon Jefferson. And then there was a lot of, white guys that were doing it too. And, Merle was born in 1917. So he kind of came up in the 30s and the 40s. And, his whole thing was like this fabulous mixture of music. It was like Tin Pan Alley and pop songs and jazz and Dixieland and blues. And it was all this stuff that existed before rock and roll. And so if you listen to any one of his albums, like the Merle Travis guitar or Walking the Strings or any of those kind of things, it's just this wonderful representation of that music that existed before rock and roll, and he really did it all and transferred it to this amazing sort of syncopated thumb playing style that he was the best at.
Yeah, I tell you what, I guess when you're first starting to learn guitar and you hear like, the Travis style of picking, you always think the bass line's got to be do ding, 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 and some kind of flowery thing on the top. But his thing was just trying to get that stride piano vibe happening the whole time. And that was a big thing for me when I was learning the styles. Like, you mean I don't have to go A string, D string, E string, D string? It's like more just getting that chunk going.
Yeah. Well, and if you're talking about thumb style guitar, you're talking about Merle Travis and Chet Atkins.
Right.
I love both of those guys, but I'll always be a Merle guy because Merle was a guy that he would get drunk. He would smoke some cigarettes. He would go hit on some girls. Somebody would hand him a guitar. He'd play something that was just loose and bluesy and it was bouncing. Right. And it was like you were saying, it was like this thump, and then he'd put that down and then he'd go fishing or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
Whereas Chet Atkins was the guy that was
very pristine. Yeah.
Buttoned up and, everything's, and Chet, would practice all the time. Right. And there's an interesting story about the album that Merle and Chet did together in the early 1970s, where they met in Hollywood and recorded together playing live. And then Chet took the tapes back to Nashville and took 8 months redoing every single one of his parts, over and over and over and over and over again until he got them absolutely perfect. Right. And that was the Chet style. He was great at it, but
sure.
But it was so much. How do I say this without offending anybody? He was just so much tighter.
Sure.
And I like that loose kind of thing. That's just the kind of music I like all around.
Chet style is kind of like a stately galloping horse, whereas Merle Travis is more like it's this greasy.
Yeah. And they're both great. Chet,
yeah, absolutely. There's no question.
You watch some of those live TV clips of Chet playing live in the 1950s, and man, he's phenomenal. He's so precise and musical at the same time. You can't fault the guy for not being musical.
No question.
He's very musical.